Hey, I'm Marcello from GameCube Galaxy on YouTube. Welcome to my game room. So this is something I picked up about a year ago, and I've always been a Simpsons fan growing up, and this is one of those childhood games for me. So seeing that this finally came out as a cabinet from Arcade 1-Up, I just had to have it. And so yeah, this is part of the collection for sure. It has the original Simpsons arcade game and Simpsons Bowling, which is the lesser known game there, but it's a fun one for sure. Up on the wall here, I have this really cool lenticular Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time frame. When I first moved into this house about 6.5 years ago, this was something I found, picked up, and I always thought looked awesome. And then over here is the Castlevania Anniversary Collection Ultimate Edition that came out. I mean, this is cool for me to have just because I'm a Castlevania fan, and I do like that it actually plays the Bloody Tears theme. So starting from here, I got this really awesome Ninja Turtle statue, and then moving to the right, we got the Sonic Mania statue that came with the collector's edition of the game that did not come with a physical copy at the time, but I did really want this statue, and I mean, let's face it, this is pretty cool. But then over here is something I just got recently, which is the Analog Pocket. Being a handheld fanatic of the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, this has been a fantastic addition to my handheld library of consoles. And honestly, ever since I got this, I've been playing far more Game Boy games, Game Boy Advance games, and even with the mod that I did on this thing, it really does open it up to be an all-in-one platform for me personally. We got the SNES Mini here, which right now is not actually currently running because instead I have the original Super Nintendo that actually Matt gave to me.
Oh yeah,
a while back.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, so got that fired up right now with one of my personal favorites on the SNES, Killer Instinct. So over here we got the Sega Astro City Mini, which is a mini arcade cabinet that Sega released in Japan. I did have to get this one imported. They did do a limited American release. I think it was through Limited Run, but this is the Japanese version that was imported here, but it's all in English. But the titles on here are games that we still haven't really seen here in the States. Games like Arabian Fight and this game here, Dark Edge, which is a really cool sprite scaling fighting game. Then over here we have the Neo Geo Mini, a compilation of 40 Neo Geo games. You can never go wrong with Metal Slug or King of Fighters. So this is a cool piece for sure as well. Over here is actually a custom painted canvas of the GameCube Galaxy logo, courtesy of Devin, Matt's nephew actually, who sent this to me. He sent this to me a few months ago. It was a complete shock and surprise because I didn't expect anything like this. So when I got this, I thought this was really, really amazing and I had to hang it up in the room. So Devin, thank you again, man. This is amazing. I really had no words when I got this. All right, so I've got the shelving unit here. So the top shelf, I actually have all of my PSP games and my minuscule PS Vita collection. I know I'm gonna get flack for this, but that handheld was actually one of the most underwhelming handhelds for me personally. But the PSP, I loved. I thought the PSP was a fantastic handheld from Sony. So here's a controller I wanna highlight in particular. This is the PS4 20th anniversary controller. So the big thing with this one was that basically it was just the iconic gray color of the PlayStation 1 controller, but also that the PlayStation logo is the original color scheme, not just the white that it had on all the other standard controllers on the PS4. So this one's really cool. This is one that has shot up a lot in price. I remember buying this actually with Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5. I know, awful game, I got it. But my thought back then was, oh, I'll play a Tony Hawk game with the standard controller, kind of give it that old school authentic feel. Truth be told, I've actually never ended up using this controller at all, so this is a completely unused controller. This is a unique GameCube controller called the Airflow. So I actually covered this on my second video ever on the channel because this is a controller I grew up with a friend of mine at the time who had this. And what was unique with this is that it actually had a fan built into the back of it, and you would turn on the fan and there was either a low strength or high strength, and ventilation would pop out of here and cool your hands down if you had sweaty palms, or if you just wanted to keep your hands cool. It was a really unique idea, and honestly, third-party controllers, for the most part, usually kind of stunk. This one actually was a excellent controller. The buttons were excellent. The sticks felt good. Honestly, it was one of the rare occasions back then where you didn't screw your friend over if you gave them a third-party controller. This has been kind of reworked a bit. I had more consoles here, but some have moved into my family room, like my PS5, my Switch. So instead, I've got a few more retro consoles mostly here. So over here, we have the TurboGrafx 16 Mini. Now, this is a very hard to come by mini console, but at the time, I was trying to get any mini consoles that were coming out, and I was always interested in the TurboGrafx 16's library, so this is a really cool piece of hardware to have. So a few years ago, when I started collecting for the GameCube again, prior to that, the PS3 was the platform I had the most amount of games for. At a time where that was the main platform of choice for me. It was when I was in college, I was working, I was making money, so it was like that transition in my life where I was able to get more games on my own. But over time, that has now dropped to second place in terms of the most games, because obviously the GameCube is now in first place with the most games in my collection, and you guys will see that shortly.
What's a GameCube?
It's a cube with games. So here we have the GameCube, which is modded with the GC loader. So I did remove the ODE lens that was in here originally. Honestly, this was just a way for me to have all the games in my library put on an SD card and to preserve the discs as well. So over here is the Evercade VS. This is a console version of the Evercade Handheld that came out back in 2020. Honestly, this is a really cool home console that I actually backed. So my name's actually in the credits of this backer version. So basically, this console actually can support up to two Evercade cartridges rather. It supports up to 4 players with any USB controllers of its choice. And honestly, it's a great way to experience retro games that if you want to get them legally, you pay for the cartridges. Every Evercade cartridge is $20 and they can contain anywhere between as little as 2 games, usually that's if they're indie games, to as much as over 12 games per cartridge. Now, the real console I want to highlight here, out of everything that's here, obviously aside from the GameCube, is this, the Polymega. The Polymega is a console that has received a ton of flack over the years due to their rollout of the console itself. I was a supporter of this thing back in 2019 when I pre-ordered mine. And it was when it was half the price it's going for now when I locked in my pre-order. I finally received my unit in November of 2021, and I have to say that it was well worth the wait. I was one of the more positive voices out there for this thing. I really knew that this thing was coming out. There's a lot of people saying, well, it's fake, it's a scam, it's not coming out. Honestly, to those people, I mean, they were just in the wrong. The company held through and they are still trying to rectify the issues, but they did get this out. They are still continuing to get it out. And it's cool because it's a module-based system. So you can easily just pop this section out. And this is just the base unit, so there's nothing to plug in. But you can get like an NES module to slide in here, an SNES, and now they have an N64 module coming out in the spring so that you can actually pop in your original cartridges and install games and just have everything stored on here. However, it also is the first emulation console to have a CD drive. And that CD drive lets you have full support to Sega CD, Sega Saturn, PS1, Neo Geo CD, and TurboGrafx CD games. It's honestly one of my favorite ways to experience retro games, if not my favorite way to experience retro games. All right, so over here, we got my N64. I mean, N64 is phenomenal. I'm sorry. Actually, no, I'm not sorry. The N64 is an excellent console. It really did revolutionize gaming for me. The moment that I got to play Super Mario 64 at the store before the N64 was officially out, and being able to run around as Mario in 3D after playing something like Super Mario World, it was mind-shattering. It was like, wow, we went into a whole new convention of how to play games. So while many will still say that the N64 has not aged well, I will die in the hill stating that the N64 provided one of the best gaming experiences in my history of gaming. So here is my first arcade 1-up cabinet, which was the Street Fighter Champion Edition. So fun fact, this was a cabinet I received a review unit for when I had another channel prior to GameCube Galaxy called Gamers Extreme. So this was actually one of the first reviews out on YouTube for an arcade 1-up cabinet when I did it with the Gamers Extreme account. And it's a video that I originally took off that account, and it was mind-blowing to see just how many people were really curious about an arcade 1-up when they were just starting to roll out. While it was really cool, it's Street Fighter 2, and it was 3 versions of Street Fighter 2, and they were all set at the hardest difficulty setting, and realistically it just wasn't that much fun to keep visiting it. So I figured, well, why not mod it? So I took apart this whole thing, I gutted the whole thing, I replaced it with a Raspberry Pi with a 128 gig image with 3,000 plus games on here, and I replaced all the buttons with far better buttons and sticks, and obviously they illuminate, so it just looks cooler. And then even down here, I drilled 2 holes to insert almost like coin buttons, so this way, just hit those and done. And then I installed a speaker on top, and at least I have full audio control of the knob. So over here I have my God of War Ascension statue that came with the collector's edition of that game. Back here we have the Ninja Gaiden 3 collector's edition statue. This is a piece I always really liked. I just thought it was really badass to have this statue of Ryu Hayabusa versus the Region of the Mask going at each other, and I like that even the backdrop shows almost like the apocalypse happening back there. So then over here I have my Street Fighter 25th Anniversary Collection statue. Then here I have the Ezio statue that came with the Master Edition of Assassin's Creed 2. Assassin's Creed 2 is my favorite installment in the entire series. Then over here we got this really badass Link statue that I believe was from Twilight Princess. This is the Master Edition of Breath of the Wild, the statue that came with that edition, with the Master Sword's in there. And let me tell you, if you lift that thing, it is heavy. That is a heavy block. Then looking down here, I got a few other figures. I got my man Jack Bauer, 24, greatest TV show ever made. Then you got Solid Snake, you got Chris and Jill from the Resident Evil 1 figures that came out way back in the day. So the closet's not as tidied up as I'd like it to be, just because I feel like with the more stuff I get, the harder it is to kind of just keep up with the space. But in here, it's basically a majority of like CD soundtracks from various games, for example. So I have like hardcovers of comic book trade paperbacks, I've got art books of games, I've got a variety of issues of Nintendo Power, Nintendo Force, I have strategy guides for games. Then I've also stored several games in here to make room on the shelves for like the GameCube games I've been getting. So I have like the Wii U section here, I have Xbox and Sega Saturn back there, I have the Wii and the PS2 going back there. So you know, it's kind of been a way for me to still have things in my room, but not display it properly yet. One game I do have in my collection is Devil's Third. This is definitely a game that I was very fortunate to get the day it launched. I remember getting this because I called a GameStop that was 40 minutes away from my house. They got 1 copy in, and it was one dude that canceled his pre-order because apparently Nintendo only sent 1 or 2 copies at a store, if at all at a store. That's more or less kind of the reason why this game is so expensive, is because it's such a low print. But what's crazy is that there was one time a few weeks later, I went to the Nintendo store in New York City. There were a ton of sealed copies there, a ton of sealed copies. And if I knew then what I know now, which is what many people would say nowadays, or if they knew the prices of retro games, I would have snagged at least 10 copies. So here we have this really cool Mortal Kombat poster that's mounted on poster board. This was actually my nephew's, and I think when he was changing up his room, my brother reached out to me. He was like, hey, I'm gonna throw this out unless you want it. So I was like, yeah, I'll definitely take it. Here I thought were really cool. My brother got these for me for 2 different events, and just putting them together side by side, it just looks pretty badass. Even though the backdrops are different, it is still sweet seeing these 2 side by side. Then over here is a life-size Mega Man helmet, and yes, you can actually put that on your head. No, I am not putting it on my head. I have once and it got stuck in my head. Here we got my Switch collection all on one shelf. There are 2 rows going here. This is all alphabetical. There was a point where the Switch was such a massive part of my gaming collection, and lately I've been cutting back tremendously on that just because, again, my focus is on GameCube now. I've been actually trimming down my Switch collection. I had far more games. I think I got rid of close to about 30 to 35 games total in the last couple months. So if you notice, I have Totakus in front of the games, and I have Agent 47, Beautiful Joe, Kratos, the Hunter from Bloodborne, which, by the way, still probably the best From Software game alongside Sekiro. Sorry, Elden Ring fans, that's at least third place or lower. And that's not a bad thing. Honestly, the DS has such a vast library of games. There were a lot of shovelware games, much like the Wii, that was that era, but the DS also had a ton of bangers. But I'm not going to mention to you guys some of the games that I recommend that are basically in everybody else's list. Games like Mario Kart DS or New Super Mario Bros. Or Super Mario 64 DS. Instead, some games that come to mind for me that are lesser known games that are third-party games that I recommend if you're looking for something different. So first up is Ninja Turtles 3 Mutant Nightmare. This is a great beat-em-up side-scroller that it doesn't take full advantage of the DS hardware, but the game itself is just a lot of fun. It's a good challenge, but if you're a Turtles fan, it's definitely one of the better 2D Turtles games that came out. Next up is Tony Hawk's American Skateland. So when I first got the DS Lite, this was one of the first of 5 games I remember getting the summer I got it. And Tony Hawk's American Skateland is just a DS port of American Wasteland. And while that's one of the more controversial installments, this one just focuses strictly on the skateboarding, but the 3D graphics engine for this game was way ahead of its time. It ran at 60 frames a second locked, full 3D, and it was a handheld experience of Tony Hawk that was the closest we got to the console versions to date at that point. Ninja Gaiden Dragon Sword. This is by far the most graphically impressive game for the DS. You actually play it by holding the DS in a portrait mode, almost like a book format, and the game is completely played with the stylus. Movement, combat, platforming, everything is all stylus based. In full 3D, 60 frames a second. This is a game that shouldn't even have been possible on the DS, but it was. Last up is going to be my personal favorite game on the DS, which is Castlevania Portrait of Ruin. Castlevania Portrait of Ruin actually takes place after the events of Castlevania Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis, and it is still very much a Metroidvania, and honestly, this is still a fantastic game. I know a lot of people love Dawn of Sorrow for some reason. I have all 3 of the Castlevania games for the DS, but Portrait of Ruin is the one that had the best soundtrack, the best gameplay to me. And also, speaking of the soundtrack, Yuzo Koshiro does part of the soundtrack, who did part of the soundtrack of Streets of Rage, so come on. All right, as far as 3DS games, I'm just gonna name a few standouts for me. These are 2 games I spent the most amount of hours playing on my 3DS. First up is Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D. I played this with a friend of mine in co-op. We spent well over 30 hours one summer playing through this game, doing everything the game had. If you like Mercenaries mode, dude, this is a portable Mercenaries mode that's just badass. And you get to play as a variety of characters. The game that I will still say is my #1 game for the 3DS is Dead or Alive Dimensions. I am a huge fan of the Dead or Alive fighting game series, and this is just a game that was flawless from start to finish for the 3DS. The game ran at the 60 frames a second that the series is known for. The combat was on point and responsive. This is starting to go up in price a bit, but I'm telling you right now, this is still worth every penny. We have the PS4, PS5 section. I kind of blended these together just for shelf space sake. PS5 section has definitely grown quite a bit since launch, but I've been far more selective getting PS5 games versus the PS4 and even the PS3 generation. Just because honestly, I barely have a chance to play PS5 games in general with all the content creation. And if I do get to play anything, I'm really trying to just play games I know I want to play and I know I'm interested in. All right, so over here, we have my N64 collection. So for the most part, actually every game I have here is complete in box and they all have retro protection on them. So my brother and I, when we got the N64, we kept all our boxes. We never threw them out, and any games that we have that I have cartridge based have all been acquired within the last like 2 or 3 years, just because I came across them. But yeah, this is a console that I loved. I have countless memories playing games like Super Mario 64, Diddy Kong Racing, Castlevania 64, which many people hate, I personally love. Also games like Zelda Ocarina of Time, Turok 2, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, and the list goes on and on. The N64 just provided countless memories for me growing up in my childhood before jumping into the GameCube era. What's cool is I actually do have a sealed N64 game. So I have Razor Freestyle Scooter, which is a Blockbuster exclusive. and I was able to snag a sealed copy years ago, actually, for a relatively good price. And as soon as I got it, I put it right in the retro protection. Over here are all my Game Boy Color, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance games, all complete in box that are here. Granted, I have a hefty library of Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games, but these are just the ones I do have with the boxes. This is something that I definitely pride on, because the Game Boy Color, actually specifically, was a console that was honestly my first own console. Okay, I actually deemed that. So the Game Boy Color I got on Christmas of '99. Basically, the Game Boy Color is just a console that I have countless memories playing. You know, whether it was games besides Pokemon Yellow, games like Spider-Man on the Game Boy Color, Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil Gaiden, Castlevania Legends. You know, these are games that were a huge part of my childhood before jumping into the Game Boy Advance generation. So yeah, this is a console I always loved. So over here we have the remainder of my Dreamcast collection and whatever's left of my PS1 collection. I state that because I've actually been purging a good chunk of my Dreamcast and PS1 collection, trying to kind of sell it off or use it toward trades to get more GameCube games in my collection as I inch closer and closer to a complete GameCube set. You know, what's here for the most part are games I want to keep. Aside from a few others I'm trying to sell, I am still trying to hang on to a few titles that I feel are bangers that I would constantly come back to. There's one Dreamcast game I do wish got a re-release on the GameCube, which is Zombie Revenge. So Zombie Revenge is actually a House of the Dead spin-off. It's a 3D beat 'em up. So moving on to the main course, which is going to be my GameCube collection. So as you can see here, I've got two wall-mounted DVD racks. These were made by Laserline back in the day. If I was able to find more of these, this would be a great way for me to just keep displaying more games, at least in this side. But each one holds about 30 games, and I felt like this is a good way for me to start the GameCube stuff, all alphabetical. And also over here, we've got the Retro Beard sign that he made for the Nintendo GameCube, which, by the way, if you haven't checked out the Retro Beard, check him out on Instagram. He makes, by far, some of the most badass custom signs. So as you can see, I have a lot of my amiibos displayed on numerous shelves. There was, for example, this one here is my Zelda amiibo section, but other shelves aren't exactly themed that way. Currently, just secured this banger right here. And this one is complete, so I'm really psyched to have. So up here I have a few Japanese GameCube games. So I have the Nintendo Puzzle Collection, which is actually a pretty fun compilation. Then I have Dream Mix TV, which is a Smash Bros. Style game with Konami characters, Takara and Hudson characters. So it's pretty cool. You get to play as Optimus Prime going up against Bomberman versus Simon Belmont. So that's pretty wild. And here is a hidden gem for me. This is Kururin Squash. Recently on the Game Boy Advance online service on the Switch, there is Kururin, which is the predecessor to this. If you have not played that game, I highly recommend checking it out. Then I have DDR Mario. I don't know if there's any difference with the Japanese version, but this was bundled with the dance pad and it seemed like it was actually the cheaper alternative just to get the dance pad than the American version. So this here, when I was a kid, I remember seeing this at GameStop and I'm like, you know what? When I go to my friends' houses that have GameCubes, instead of me bringing like 12 cases of games with me, I would just take out a game and pop the discs in here, which I thought was pretty cool. And there was a little slot to put memory cards here, which is kind of nice. And it was just a nice compact way to keep all the games in there. So here's a game that is fantastic for multiplayer, Pac-Man Versus. This was free when you bought one of 3 Namco games back in the day. One was I Ninja, which is the game I got back then, where GameStop tagged this along with it for free for me. It was not until a few years later I got to finally play this with somebody. Just because I needed I didn't have the Game Boy Advance link cable at the time, a friend of mine did. And when we tried it, I was like, holy crap, this is a blast. So then over here we have a GameCube preview DVD. This was also this was actually at Best Buy that they were giving these out. Same thing, it had a bunch of videos to check out for upcoming games. Again, at a time when you didn't have instant access, it was sweet to pop this into your DVD player and just watch trailers of upcoming games. So at Five Below, they had these little random controller things you can get, and one, you know, there's like Game Boy Advance, there's 3DS, and there was one time where I actually got the last one at the store, and it happened to be the GameCube, even though the analog sticks are totally loose. So over here is actually a little bit more of a GameCube oddity. So this is actually a GameCube calculator that opens up slowly. So employees were actually given this that worked at Nintendo. I was able to snag one of these off of eBay because I really thought this was pretty cool. But it is missing the battery cover. But again, it's a collector's piece and I wanted to add it to my collection. So above these games, I actually have plushes I came across that were from my childhood. So when I used to go to EB Games when I was much younger, they had these plushes of Mario, Luigi, Bowser, Banjo, and I snagged these all that they had. So when I moved down here and I came across them in the boxes, I was actually in shock because I completely forgot about them. So I was really excited to get them and actually display them here again. I couldn't think of a better way to display a little bit more of my childhood. 2 sealed GameCube games still in the collection. I have Frogger, Ancient Shadow, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Chaos Bleeds. I actually covered this in my Halloween themed episode, but so this one's technically not opened fully, but it still had a ripped plastic. So I don't know, is it new? According to GameStop, this stuff is new if you open up the box, throw the disc against the wall and all that. But should I open it?
Should open it. Should open it.
Nah, what do you think? Think I'm going to?
I think you're going to. I think it's already almost open anyway, so why not?
So I'm gonna unwrap I'm gonna rip the seal off.
People are screaming at the screen right now. Get it graded!
Now the one thing I gotta say that I love with unwrapping a new game is just when you know it's that like brand new clean plastic, right? I don't know if that's a weird thing, but there's just something about opening a brand new game that I always thought was just an awesome feeling.
That is a beauty.
But also, I don't know if you guys ever do this, but I always had this knack of every time I open up a new game, I gotta take this stuff and shove it in the back.
Every time.
Or just put the book in the front. Nobody wants to see those. So over here is the Sonic 30th Anniversary Edition statue that I got Christmas of 2021. And this is a statue that definitely means a lot to me, specifically for the reason that this was the last gift I ever received from my oldest brother that I unfortunately lost last year suddenly. So I've been holding anything he's given to me more near and dear than ever before, but this in particular being the last thing I ever received from him. So that being said, it is a pretty amazing statue. All right, so over here, wrapping up my collection, I have my PS3 library. PS3 wise, I have well over 200 physical games. As I stated before, this used to be the collection that I had the most games for until I got heavy back into GameCube collecting. But that being said, the PS3 was one of my favorite consoles. I have so many memories playing so many outstanding games, both first party and third party, as well as a lot of excellent downloadable PSN games. So yeah, I mean, so as you can see, the collection has been growing. It is all alphabetical. It goes all down this shelf and it continues over here in the 2 more rows, and there are well over another 15 games that still have to be added there and have been acquired recently. So currently I will be sitting at close to 400 GameCube games in my collection, which leaves me with roughly 150 plus games left to go. So pretty exciting, but now it's the tough part because it's gonna be a lot of the expensive bangers. Oh, and I also have the PlayStation Classic. So I hope you guys enjoyed the game room tour. Collecting it for all these various consoles has been a pride and joy of mine. It's definitely something I thoroughly enjoy doing. So definitely feel free to check out my channel, GameCube Galaxy. The link will be in the description down below. I try to do videos once every 2 weeks on Sundays at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. I do my best to try to provide high quality videos for the GameCube itself, as it's a console that I feel was never much beloved back then, that has only garnered far more interest now. And there's never been a better time to check out the channel and check out the variety of videos that have been there for the almost last 2 years that the channel was started. So I hope to see you guys there, and thank you again to RetroWolf for doing this awesome game room tour. Boom.
Dude, you know, I can do a really good Hadouken.
Do it.
All right, you ready?
Ready.
Hadouken!
For Ocarina of Time, there is Princess Peach. Wow, Princess Peach is not in Zelda. The Legend of Princess Peach. The Legend of Peach.
I was always taught to keep it wrapped before you penetrate your console with the cartridge.
I already hear Devin's voice in my head saying, yeah, I'm cutting that.
I'm so jelly. Yeah, Devin, cut that.
I am not putting it on my head. I have once and it got stuck in my head.
Whoa, now, Marcello. Whoa, easy there.
Cut that out. Cut that out. Oh my god. All right, so over here we got this badass. There's gonna be a lot of bloopers in this one.
That's staying in.
And over here, we have this really badass ninja. Oh, hold on. This is just a statue that is badass. I already said that twice. Fucking A. Take 492. What are we up to? Pieces I've loved. Show. Forget it. Fuck it.